January 1979, Colorado Springs. A black man stands in a room full of Klansmen. White robes surround him. The air reeks of smoke and hatred. One wrong word, and he's dead. But he's not running. He's smiling because he's about to drape his arm around David Duke, Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, for a photograph. Duke has no idea that this cop, Detective Ron Stallworth, is the same Ron Stallworth he's been confiding Klan secrets to over the phone for months. Duke bragged he could detect a black man's voice instantly, but he was talking to one the entire time. And here's what makes this insane. Ron didn't plan any of it. He answered a KKK recruitment ad in the newspaper, and when the Klan called back, thrilled to recruit him, he had 3 seconds to decide, hang up, or become the racist he'd pretended to be on paper. He chose wrong, or maybe exactly right. How did a black rookie cop fool the KKK for 9 months? And what happened when Duke finally learned the truth? October 1978. Ron Stallworth sits at a metal desk in the Colorado Springs Police Department, drowning in paperwork that nobody will ever read. He's 25 years old, the department's first black detective in history, and thoroughly bored out of his mind. His assignment in the intelligence division amounts to clipping newspaper articles about extremist groups, filing index cards on suspected radicals, and waiting for something to happen. He wants real cases, real stakes, something that proves he belongs in that detective's chair. Then he spots a classified ad in the Colorado Springs Gazette, 3 lines of small type buried in the back pages. Ku Klux Klan. For information, contact P.O. Box 4771. The KKK, recruiting openly in Colorado. Ron stares at those words. The Klan hasn't had a meaningful presence in this state for decades. What are they doing here? An idea forms, reckless and electric. Before he can talk himself out of it, he grabs a sheet of plain paper and writes a letter posing as an angry white man fed up with minorities ruining America. The phrases flow easily, borrowed from hate literature he's cataloged for months. He signs it with his real name, Ron Stallworth, figuring the Klan will mail back a pamphlet he can file and forget. 1 week later, his desk phone rings. A man's voice, low and eager. "Is this Ron Stallworth? I got your letter." In that moment, Ron's stomach plummets. He'd expected a form letter, maybe a brochure, not a phone call. The voice belongs to Ken Odell, organizer for the local Klan chapter, and Odell sounds genuinely thrilled to have received Ron's hateful screed. Ron has seconds to decide, hang up and abandon this thread, or become the racist character he invented on paper. He clears his throat, lowers his voice half an octave, and dives in headfirst. "Why do I want to join the Klan?" Ron repeats Odell's question like the answer should be obvious. Then he unleashes a flood of slurs so vicious, so over the top, that his sergeant, listening on an extension line across the room, nearly drops the receiver in shock. There is silence on Odell's end. 1 beat, 2, then a delighted chuckle. The Klansman eats up every word. By the end of the call, Odell is calling Ron brother and scheduling a face-to-face meeting at a local bar for later that week. Ron hangs up, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He just talked his way into the Ku Klux Klan using nothing but his voice and his nerve. Then reality crashes down. He agreed to meet them in person, and he used his real name. His sergeant stares at him from across the desk, face pale. "You just promised to meet the KKK. In person." Ron nods slowly. He did. The young detective has essentially volunteered to walk into a room full of men who would beat him to death if they discovered the truth. It's either the most brilliant move of his career or the last mistake he'll ever make. They huddle in a corner of the office, minds racing through increasingly desperate options. Ron can't show up to that meeting, but if he cancels, he blows the investigation before it starts. His eyes land on Chuck, a white narcotics detective with undercover experience, passing through the hallway, and an idea crystallizes. What if there were 2 Ron Stallworths? Chuck listens to the pitch in a back office, eyebrows climbing higher with every sentence. When Ron finishes explaining, Chuck doesn't hesitate. He's in. From this moment forward, Ron will handle every phone call. maintaining the racist persona he's already established. Chuck will attend every in-person meeting, wearing Ron's identity like a second skin. 2 detectives, 1 fake Klansman, and 1 shared identity. If either man slips up even once, the entire house of cards collapses, and both could pay with their lives. Ron looks at his own dark hands, then at Chuck's pale face. The scheme sounds certifiably insane, but it's the only play they have. Operation Undercover Klansman begins. The plan exists on paper. But can 2 men with different faces, different voices, different mannerisms convincingly share one identity in front of people who murder for racial purity? And what happens when Chuck walks into that bar and the Klansmen start asking questions that Ron never thought to prepare him for? 3 nights later, Chuck pulls his unmarked sedan into the gravel lot of a dive bar on the outskirts of Colorado Springs. A surveillance wire runs beneath his shirt, its transmitter pressing cold against his skin. Outside in an unmarked van half a block away, Ron presses headphones to his ears, heart thudding loud enough to hear. Everything depends on the next hour. If Chuck gets made, there's no backup plan. Inside, 3 men wait at a corner booth beneath a flickering Coors sign. The chapter president, a wiry man named Fred Wilkins, nurses a Budweiser. Beside him sits a heavy-set bruiser with suspicious eyes and arms like ham hocks. The third is a younger recruit nervously shredding a coaster. All 3 watch Chuck cross the barroom floor. Chuck extends his hand. "Ron Stallworth, appreciate y'all meeting with me." Wilkins grips Chuck's hand, studying his face with cold eyes. For a frozen second, Ron braces for disaster in the van. Will they notice the voice doesn't quite match the phone calls? That Chuck carries himself differently than they imagined? But the Klansmen see what they expect to see. A white man filled with the right kind of hatred. They wave Chuck into the booth, sliding a beer across the table. Over lukewarm Budweisers that Chuck pretends to drink, they pepper him with questions. Why does he want to join? What triggered his racial awakening? Chuck recites the script Ron fed him, snarling about a fictional sister dating a black man, the same story Ron used on the phone. The men eat it up. Every slur Chuck forces through his teeth earns approving nods and toasts. Then the bruiser leans forward, eyes narrowing to slits. "You sound different than I expected, Ron." In the van, Ron stops breathing. Chuck coughs into his fist, buying a half second to think. "Allergies. Mountain air's been murdering my sinuses all week." He shifts his cadence slightly, matching the rhythm and drawl Ron established on the phone. The bruiser grunts, apparently satisfied by the explanation. Crisis cleared by a fake cough and quick thinking. Another test lands minutes later, sharper than the first. Wilkins fixes Chuck with a penetrating stare, beer bottle frozen halfway to his lips. "You're not a cop, are you, Ron?" Chuck forces a laugh that he hopes sounds natural. In the van, Ron has to bite his fist to keep from howling at the cosmic irony. Chuck leans in conspiratorially, lowering his voice. "Cops are part of the problem, letting minorities run wild while white men get arrested for defending themselves and their families." The Klansmen exchange satisfied glances. Wilkins claps Chuck hard on the shoulder. "That's exactly what I like to hear, brother." When the meeting finally ends, Wilkins hands Chuck a Klan membership application to fill out at home. "We'll send this up to state headquarters for processing. Might even get signed by the Grand Wizard himself." The Grand Wizard, David Duke. Hearing that name through his headset, Ron raises an eyebrow. David Duke, leader of the entire KKK, will personally review Ron Stallworth's application. Chuck walks out into the cool night air, alive and unexposed. In the van, Ron watches his partner flash a subtle thumbs up in the darkness. 2 detectives just fooled a room full of Klansmen on their very first attempt. But neither man celebrates. Before leaving, Wilkins mentioned an upcoming event in hushed tones, a cross burning on private land, a welcome celebration for new members like Ron. The Klan isn't just talking, they're acting. Within days, Ron's membership application lands on David Duke's desk at KKK National Headquarters in Louisiana. The Grand Wizard reviews it, sees nothing suspicious in the enthusiastic racism, and signs his name with a flourish. Ron Stallworth, a black detective working for the Colorado Springs Police Department, is now officially a card-carrying member of the Ku Klux Klan. Ron has breached the walls faster than anyone anticipated, but the Klan is already planning its next moves, and Duke himself is about to enter the picture in a way Ron never expected. What happens when the most famous white supremacist in America starts personally mentoring a recruit he's never actually seen? And how long can Ron maintain two identities before the Klan notices the seams? Mid-1979. Ron Stallworth has become one of the Colorado chapter's most valued members. The real Ron maintains the illusion through regular phone calls, adopting a drawling accent that would make a Deep South segregationist proud. Chuck keeps showing up to meetings in person, reporting every word, every plan, and every name back to the intelligence unit. The double deception runs so smoothly that it begins to feel routine, almost boring. Then Ron gets impatient. His official membership card still hasn't arrived in the mail. Rather than wait, he decides to call the KKK's national headquarters directly, dialing a number listed in Klan literature as the voice of the Klan. He expects a secretary or a recorded message. Instead, a cheerful voice answers on the second ring. "This is David Duke." Ron nearly drops the phone. David Duke, Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, the most prominent white supremacist in America, a regular guest on television news programs. And he answers his own phone. Ron recovers in a heartbeat, slipping back into character. "Mr. Duke, this is Ron Stallworth calling from Colorado. I sent in my application a while back, sir, and I'm just mighty eager to get my membership card." He pours on flattery about Duke's leadership, his sophisticated public image, his vision for the white race. Duke is thoroughly charmed. He apologizes for any delay, promises to expedite everything personally, asks about the Colorado chapter's morale and recruitment. By the time they hang up, Duke is treating Ron like a promising protégé rather than a random applicant. Within a week, Ron receives a bright red card in the mail, embossed with the KKK seal and bearing David Duke's personal signature. A black man now holds official credentials in America's oldest hate organization. But Duke doesn't stop at the membership card. He starts calling Ron directly. Casual check-ins at first, just touching base with his Colorado recruit. Then longer conversations about ideology, political strategy, and the future of the white power movement. Duke apparently sees in Ron Stallworth a model member, articulate, passionate, and educated in the finer points of racial theory. He shares plans for expanding into mainstream politics, dreams of a whites-only nation, strategies for recruiting from the military and law enforcement. Ron murmurs agreement into the phone while scribbling furious notes for his intelligence reports. Between genocidal diatribes, Duke is disarmingly normal. He cracks jokes about the weather, discusses football games, and complains about airline food. It's jarring, this Jekyll and Hyde quality, how a man can chat pleasantly about mundane irritations and then pivot seamlessly into fantasies about ethnic cleansing. Ron files that observation away. The banality of evil wears a friendly face and makes small talk. On one call, Ron can't resist probing the limits. "Mr. Duke," he asks with exaggerated innocence, "aren't you worried that some black man might call you up, pretend to be white, and fool everyone in the Klan?" Duke laughs dismissively. "That could never happen. I can tell just from someone's voice whether they're white or not. Pronunciation, inflection, and the way they structure sentences. I'd know immediately if I was speaking with an inferior." Ron bites his lip so hard it nearly draws blood. The Grand Wizard of the KKK, bragging about his infallible racial radar, has been confiding secrets to a black detective for weeks. Ron plays along, agreeing that those savages could never fool someone as perceptive as David Duke. The irony threatens to choke him. While Ron cultivates Duke's trust over the phone, Chuck uncovers something far more dangerous at the local meetings. Two members have been whispering in corners about supplies and the army base. One of them, an older man the chapter calls Doc, turns out to be a soldier stationed at NORAD, the Air Force installation that monitors North American airspace for nuclear threats and coordinates continental defense. Doc brags to Chuck about having access to military-grade materials, explosives, detonators, and whatever the cause might need. Ron's blood runs cold when Chuck reports this back. A Klansman with security clearance and access to military ordnance, inside one of the most sensitive installations in the country. This isn't cross burnings and recruitment drives anymore. This is domestic terrorism brewing in plain sight. The next week brings worse news. The chapter president mentions something to Ron during a routine phone call. An alliance with like-minded radicals up in Denver, a bombing of gay nightclubs in Denver. And the Klan expects Ron Stallworth to help execute it. Ron hangs up the phone with trembling hands. What started as a bizarre undercover experiment has metastasized into a race against mass murder. The KKK is preparing to kill innocent people, and they've invited their own saboteur into the heart of the conspiracy. How does Ron stop a bomb plot without blowing his cover and getting himself killed? And what happens when the military discovers that one of their own soldiers at a nuclear defense installation is planning to steal explosives for a hate group? The moment Ron learns the timeline for the Denver bombing, the operation pivots from intelligence gathering to active prevention. He briefs his chief within the hour, laying out everything. The NORAD connection, the explosives talk, the Denver alliance, and the target list. Messages go out through back channels to military commanders, FBI field agents, and Denver police. The critical constraint: nobody can know where this information originated. One leak traces back to the Colorado Springs KKK chapter, and Ron and Chuck become targets. The military moves first and moves quietly. Doc and another Klansman in uniform find themselves suddenly reassigned without explanation, transferred to posts hundreds of miles from NORAD, stripped of any access to weapons, explosives, or sensitive materials. No arrests, no announcements, and no paper trail that could expose an informant. Just quiet administrative actions that gut the Klan's inside connection before they can steal so much as a blasting cap. The Denver bombing plot dies next. On the rumored target date, plainclothes officers flood the streets around the designated gay clubs. Uniformed police patrol nearby blocks. The Klan's boys up north arrive to scout their targets and spot law enforcement everywhere they look. They abort. To the KKK, it's a baffling stroke of terrible luck. To Ron, it's innocent lives saved who will never know how close the crosshairs came. By early 1979, the Colorado Springs chapter is badly demoralized. Their bombing plot evaporated. Their cross burnings keep getting interrupted. Their recruitment has stalled, and yet they remain completely blind to the moles sitting in their meetings, answering their phone calls and listening to their secrets. When word arrives that David Duke himself plans to visit Colorado Springs, morale finally spikes. The Grand Wizard wants to personally initiate new members and boost chapter spirits. Ron Stallworth is specifically mentioned for special recognition as one of the chapter's most dedicated and enthusiastic recruits. Ron laughs out loud when he hears Duke is flying in to congratulate a black man who's been systematically sabotaging the Klan for months. But Duke's visit creates an unexpected complication. Paranoid about security after receiving death threats, Duke has requested a police detail during his stay in Colorado Springs. Ron's chief summons him with news that lands like a punch to the gut. Detective Ron Stallworth will serve as David Duke's personal bodyguard during his visit. Ron stares at his commanding officer. "Sir, you realize who David Duke is? Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. And you want me specifically to protect him?" The chief doesn't blink. That's exactly why he wants Ron in the details. Who better to monitor Duke's movements and conversations than the detective who's already inside his organization? Ron will be armed, in full uniform, standing arm's length from the man he's been deceiving on the phone for months. Ron agrees, though the sheer absurdity threatens to break his composure. Both Ron Stallworths will occupy the same room with David Duke. The black detective in police blue, the white detective playing Klansman. One wrong word, one moment of recognition, one slip of the tongue, and the whole elaborate deception collapses in front of the most dangerous possible audience. Duke lands in Colorado Springs expecting a hero's welcome. He has no idea what's actually waiting for him. But how long can two men share one identity when they're standing 15 feet apart? And what will Duke do when he shakes hands with the black officer assigned to keep him alive? January 10th, 1979. David Duke's plane touches down at Colorado Springs Airport, and the local KKK chapter buzzes with anticipation. Their Grand Wizard has come to reward their loyalty, to initiate new blood into the Brotherhood, to remind them why their cause matters. Police protection has been arranged through official channels. Death threats follow David Duke everywhere he travels. Detective Ron Stallworth arrives at the hotel banquet hall. He's the only black face in a sea of white robes and crisp suits. Klansmen mill about the room, shooting him glances of open contempt. He ignores them all, taking his assigned position near the main entrance, playing the role of dutiful officer. Duke sweeps into the hall flanked by aides and local leaders, all polished smile and practiced politician's charisma. He spots Ron immediately and does a visible double take. A black cop, assigned to his personal security detail. Duke's lips tighten, but he says nothing. Years of political ambition have taught him to control his face, even when his blood boils. Inside, Chuck works the room in civilian clothes, playing Ron Stallworth, the eager Klansman, one final time. Both Rons now occupy the same space, separated by 15 feet and a universe of secrets, each pretending not to know the other. The irony is thick enough to taste. Duke works the crowd for an hour, shaking hands with followers, accepting praise for his leadership, and delivering impromptu remarks about the white race's glorious future. Eventually, protocol requires him to acknowledge the police detail. He approaches Ron with an extended hand, the polite gesture of a public figure meeting law enforcement. Ron accepts the handshake, and then he feels it. Duke pressing 2 fingers firmly against his inner wrist, wiggling them rhythmically between Ron's knuckles. The secret Klan handshake. A fraternal signal. A test, perhaps, to see how this black cop reacts. Ron executes it back perfectly, applying pressure in the exact pattern he learned from studying intelligence files. Duke's expression flickers. Confusion crosses his features for just a moment. His brow furrows. How does this black officer know the Klan's secret recognition sign? But Duke says nothing. He can't ask without admitting what he just did. He moves on, visibly unsettled. When the rally breaks for photographs, Ron sees his opening to claim a trophy. He approaches Duke and the state's Grand Dragon, positioning himself between the 2 Klan leaders with practiced casualness. Chuck stands nearby holding a camera, ready and waiting. "Smile for the camera, Mr. Duke," Ron says, flashing an easy grin that shows all his teeth. Before Duke can process what's happening, Ron drapes his arms over the shoulders of both men like they're old fraternity brothers reuniting at homecoming. The flash fires, and the Polaroid whirs out its developing image. Duke's face contorts with visceral disgust as he realizes what just happened. A black man's arm wrapped around his shoulders, physical contact initiated by someone he considers subhuman, captured on film forever. Duke lunges for the photograph. "Give me that." Ron plucks the developing image from Chuck's fingers and slides it smoothly into his breast pocket. His voice drops low, audible only to Duke, calm and measured. "Assaulting a police officer is a serious crime, Mr. Duke. I wouldn't recommend trying it." Duke freezes in place. The Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, a man who built his entire career terrorizing black Americans, stands paralyzed by a black detective with a badge, a gun, and a camera. For one crystalline moment, Ron holds absolute power over the most prominent white supremacist in the country. Duke swallows his rage, turns on his heel, and walks away, pretending nothing happened. The undercover operation reaches its natural conclusion days later. The local chapter president pulls Chuck aside with extraordinary news. He's stepping down from leadership, and he wants Ron Stallworth to assume command as the new chapter head. It's the ultimate mark of trust. It's also the signal that this charade has reached its limit. If Chuck actually became the leader of the Colorado Springs KKK, the ethical and practical complications would multiply beyond control. Ron's superiors agree unanimously. They've foiled bombings, prevented cross-burnings, identified Klan members in the military, and humiliated the Grand Wizard himself. It's time to vanish. Ron Stallworth disappears without explanation or farewell. The Klan assumes their star recruit got spooked by the photo incident or simply lost his nerve. They will never learn the truth, that their most dedicated member was a black man who played them for fools across 9 months of meticulous deception. He had beaten hate at its own game. And decades later, when Ron finally told his story to the public, David Duke still refused to believe any of it was true. The Grand Wizard insisted it couldn't have happened, that he would have known, that his instincts for detecting racial imposters were infallible. But the membership card says otherwise. You've just watched one man dismantle a hate group from inside its ranks. But the KKK wasn't the only domestic terror threat operating in America's shadows. Another organization waged war against the government itself, and the FBI's secret campaign to destroy them claimed lives on both sides. That story is waiting for you right here.